Dr. David Starkey is with me, and unlike many other people on our television screens, he actually knows what Ukraine is and where Ukraine is. So, David, let's start with the most basic question. What is it that's just happened, and why did Putin do it?
Because Putin thinks that he's a czar. What Putin is doing, he's told us, Mark. I mean, this is what's so extraordinary. Putin, just like Hitler in Mein Kampf, has been telling us for years what he intends to do. He intends to revive the Tsarist empire. He, back in those days when we had decent American presidents, they got a bust of Churchill in the Oval Office. He has got a whole statue of Peter the Great. It's Peter the Great who conquers one half of the Ukraine. It's Catherine the Great who conquers the other half. And it's the great Russian idolized general Alexander Suvorov who conquers the area immediately, the Crimea and everything else that's on the Baltic. He sees himself, Putin sees himself as reversing the loss of that through the disintegration of the Soviet Union, through the persistent what you were describing there, the nibbling of American capitalism into crony capitalism in the Ukraine. He sees it as his mission to recover it. Putin is a czar. But there's something else, Mark. Putin understands force. Biden doesn't. We're in a world that we thought we've ever seen. Sorry, I think you were wrong in what you did. Am I allowed to say you're wrong in your account there of Europe? We have lived in a myth since the Second World War. We had little wars in the Balkans. We had little wars in Libya, where else? But broadly speaking, we haven't had big wars because what we did, we imagined, we in the West, that we didn't need force, that force was nasty. So what does your country do? Even more than most. What does America do? What does my country do? We spend 80% of our revenues on welfare and health and pensions. All the other activities of the state, including the fundamental one which is keeping us safe, shrink to these tiny little sums. Putin thinks in the same way as Churchill, as Palmerston, as Bismarck. He understands force. We are at his mercy. It's as simple as that, which is why you were saying countries that have been worried. It's not simply Belarus wanting a bit of the action. You actually look in Lithuania, they too have declared states of emergency. There is terror. These are czar. Look at the scene. We've got it now. These vast spaces. And who is there now sitting at his feet? Imran Khan. Because, again, the nonsense that we hear all the time, that now Putin will be a pariah, nobody will want to speak to him. 20% of the world only are democracies. The rest are various varieties of dictatorships. They love what Putin is doing. Xi loves what Putin is doing. The Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow. Sorry, we've thrown away the only weapon that they understand, which is force. People have been saying this is 1938, this is 1936. It's worse. Right. In 1936, Britain was a great empire. It had vast armed forces, it had the world's largest navy. Now we're puny. Yeah. We can simply swear at him and try to impose sanctions. And the sanctions won't bite. He's got a war chest of just short of $500 billion. Like Thatcher with the miners, he's prepared for this war. We've sat and watched.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right on that. And in fact, the point you made about welfare spending, if you go back to the early 50s, like almost every other European power, what we used to spend then on war and our armies, we now spend on welfare provisions. And that's what made Macron's remark particularly pathetic, I thought, that he seemed genuinely to believe that we were in a post-war world. With hindsight, David, with hindsight, do you think we were just happened to be lucky 30 years ago that Russia happened to have fallen into the hands of a guy who didn't have the stomach for bloodshed? And that's why it was a peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Empire. And that this guy really thinks if he can assemble if he can get Ukraine back in the fold, what's to stop him getting the Baltic states back in the fold? Last time round, 30 years ago, the Russian sphere came all the way up to East Berlin. Do you think he's thinking big here?
He could be. The point is, he will go it step by step. He's like all bullies. He pushes to find to the point of weakness. If you give way, he'll push again. On the other hand, do remember, as well we all know, that the Baltic states, Germany, are covered by the NATO umbrella. But then, what has Putin said? He is prepared for nuclear war. Are we? Are we?
Yeah, no.
And it's worse,
Andy,
because, of course, we've lived in this world of illusion.
David.
We thought that international law, we thought that human rights existed independent of force. We're now seeing, where is human rights? Where is international law? They are mere illusions. We've lived in a world, I'm sorry, Mark, we've lived in a world of illusion. Reality is hitting us now like a rocket.
Yeah, that's very true. On that point, David, Andy Biggs, who was a big shot guy in Congress and in the Trump administration, was just telling Nigel Farage that as far as he was concerned, he couldn't see Americans going to war for Estonia. So do you think that as a practical matter, NATO may well prove to be an illusion?
God help us if it's true. At least we have a nuclear deterrent. Are we prepared, to get to that point? Will we do another Bay of Pigs? Will we be able to do what Kennedy did and face it down? Do we actually have the will to do it? And I'm sorry, this is the problem, Mark. We have lived in this world of illusion. We've thought that war was so last century, that violence was nasty, that we had really important things to do like worrying about the planet, which of course has left us completely open. As we've destroyed our nuclear power, we've failed to develop our oil resources, we've thrown away our chance to frack, we've thrown away natural gas. Rome ends, the great Empire of Rome ends when the barbarians cut the aqueducts. Putin can simply turn off the gas. No, sorry, he can just turn it off, exactly as in 537 the aqueducts were cut and Rome changes from the capital of the world to a malarial-ridden village. Sorry, we've lost the sense of power. We've lost the sense of that states depend on the ability to defend themselves. I mean, Putin actually addresses this question. When there was the press conference, when he first, 3 days ago, announces his decision that he will go to war, this is before the actual declaration, he was asked a question. Putin's actually quite good at answering questions, unlike Biden and our own Prime Minister. And the chap in the audience said to him, how can a good country go to war? What does Putin say? Why do you think, because you were good, you can't use force? Doesn't goodness depend on the ability of self-defense? Now, Churchill would have thought that. Margaret Thatcher would have thought that. And suddenly, after 1989, we went into this never land. This illusion of the United Nations, this preposterous world of Geneva and New York.
Isn't that actually the problem, though, that Putin, the way he thinks, would have been like any prime minister or president a generation or two back. He's calculating what is in his nation's interest. When you listen to all these people, whether it's Kamala Harris or the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, or the Prime Minister of Canada, the United Kingdom, wherever you want to name, they're all talking as if there's some kind of global commons, the brotherhood of man that they represent. There is no such thing, and as a result, the poor Ukrainians are going to be screwed because they're actually living in the real world, not in this unicorn prancing landscape of Western prime ministers.
Absolutely. I mean, that is it. But it is total illusion. And it's the illusion that they try and apply here. I mean, what is defunding the police about in America? It's this strange notion that there's somehow natural goodness. If only we talk to each other. Isn't the emblem of the degeneracy of our society what's going on outside every Russian embassy at the moment? There are lots of lovely little Trustafarian children, all in tears, holding up little signs which say, "Give peace a chance," and "Come by our," and shouldn't we be thinking about the planet? And isn't this just not what I want? So this is the madness. This is the madness.
Is it a consequence of this very unusual period, as you were saying, and as Kamala Harris was saying, this 70-year period, that around about 1950, America basically inherited the world by default because everybody else's capitals had been bombed to rubble, and it's not an empire. It doesn't have an imperialist bone in its body. It's not like the Habsburgs, it's not like the Hohenzollerns, it's not like the Romanovs. And so
it's very like the British Empire. Very like the British Empire.
No, it's nothing like that. But instead it created these transnational bodies that somehow seem to have become a thing in themselves. So you have global elites, the British Empire, the French Empire, Portuguese Empire, whoever you want to name. When they'd go around the world, they were thinking of what's in Britain's, what's in France's, what's in Portugal's interest. Now we have global elites who seem to be a kind of race apart, and their interests seem totally detached from these humdrum nation states they chance to be born in.
Yeah, be careful. It's what you're talking about, the Pax Americana. The Pax Americana is the direct successor of the British Empire, which is why the British Empire is the only empire consciously to have created successor states, and why it consciously creates a successor to the empire in the form of the rules-based Commonwealth. Britain invents globalization. America inherits globalization, but then gives it this extra twist because of the supremacy of American power. The apparent reality of all these international institutions you talked about is because of the combined power of Wall Street on the one hand and the American armed forces on the other. That's what gives the apparent reality. But of course, that reality is now disintegrated. You have rival centers of power. China, and now Russia again. Again, all these rude words about Putin. Putin is the world's third power. It's America, it's China, it's Russia. And the rest of us are, with the possible exception of India, we are nowhere. But once you've got that multipolar world, you can't any longer sustain that global illusion that you're talking about. The global illusion always depended on American power, to put it in a simple, compact statement. That's what it depended on. Once American power is now regionalized, because it's been pushed out by China, pushed out by Russia again, once it's regionalized on the one hand, and when it's wielded by whatever we want to call Biden, we can use as many rude names about him as we wish. Once it's wielded in such an incompetent, such a confused and unpurposeful fashion, and of course with the hideous example of Kabul, how can you shape a global order when you run away like frightened rabbits? And the scenes in Kabul were shameful. They were shameful. It was much, much worse than the fall of Saigon. At least in Saigon, there was a serious enemy.
Yeah.
This was simply running away. It was a display of cowardice. I mean, how could the troops do it? An army that runs away. Well, and the Russian army doesn't run away, by the way.
No, and we all know that, and we don't like to think how it would go if it actually got into an America-Russian shooting war, because we saw what happened in Kabul. But let me ask you then, if America's 1950 moment, as it were, of global dominance is over, what's next?
A revival of the competition of empires. So isn't it clear that we thought imperialism was dead? And we're told, of course, our own was particularly wicked when it was relatively benign. But you were saying war is as old as mankind. Imperialism is as old as mankind. China is an empire. It sees itself as an empire. It is about to retake Taiwan. And heaven only help Korea. That used to be part of the sphere of influence. Again, Africa is there to be carved up. Lord only knows what will happen to Australia, because we've thrown our weapons away. We have stripped off. We're naked. We're defenseless. And we're rich. I mean, Germany is the most obvious example. Have you read today what the head of the German armed forces says? He said, I never thought we would have... This is a soldier. I never thought we would have another war. He was practically crying. And then he went on and said, our armed forces are dry. There's nothing there. They've been doing drill with broomsticks. Germany isn't even a state anymore. Germany is, it's a customs union. It's a machinery for exporting Volkswagen. And the EU is exactly the same. And the EU has deliberately set itself up right from the beginning to destroy the nation state, which is the only thing to which people feel the attachment that they'll fight for. No one's going to fight for Europe.
No, absolutely. And so we've created a situation where we have the wealthiest societies in human history. They can't defend themselves. And meanwhile, we have basket cases like North Korea going nuclear. And people somehow expect that Norway, super wealthy, no army, and North Korea, broke, makes nothing but knock off Viagra, but it has nuclear weapons, that world is going to endure. Thank you, as always, David, for laying out the big picture about what's going on here. It was a pleasure to see you and to listen to that exegesis of what's going on.